Very little is known about the true purpose of the bristles. It has been suggested that they can be used to feel in the dark, or even sense the speed and direction of water currents. However, neither of those theories explain why the bristles would then be found most predominantly on the male. It has also been suggested that the bristles serve some sort of sensory function because they're covered in taste buds. However, most of their body is covered in taste buds, so that's not a satisfactory explanation either. Since the bristles are predominantly a male feature and it's only the male who cares for the eggs and fry, it stands to reason that the bristles are probably related to reproduction and caring for the offspring. It has been theorized that the bristles have evolved as a bit of trickery on the part of the male. You see, female bristlenose seem to prefer spawning with males who are already guarding fry. So the thinking is that a male who is not guarding fry can gain an advantage by tricking the females into thinking that the multiple bristles on his head are a group of young fry, thus fooling potential mates into thinking that the male with all of the bristles is a competent father who has a safe site in which to spawn. So, at the end of the day, the bristles may be nothing more than an elaborate deception to convince the ladies to mate. The bristles grow as the males approach sexual maturity and may continue to grow throughout their life. It has been reported that, in the wild, the bristles increase in size during the mating season and then shrink when the season is over. The growth of these elaborate bristles seems counterproductive for a fish that has evolved with so many adaptations that enable it to thrive in fast-moving water. The bristles seem cumbersome and interfere with the streamlined nature of the fish, which is a very big sacrifice because most fish are, by their very nature, designed to be streamlined. So it stands to reason that the advantages of having the bristles must outweigh the disadvantages of having a less streamlined shape. It's also very likely that those advantages are related to reproduction. Notice the size of the bristles on this male. This footage was taken just recently. And now here is the same male from the year before. Notice how much bigger his bristles were last year. The two images seen here are of the same male, and as you can see, his bristles were larger in 2019 than they are in 2020. It may have something to do with the fact that for the last year or more, he's been kept in a tank where there are no females. Bristlenose catfish are cavity spawners and will require some sort of cave or large crevice in which to deposit their eggs. The typical recommendation is to use narrow clay tubes or small pieces of PVC pipe as spawning sites. These tubes are said to be most effective if the width of the tube is just a bit wider than the diameter of the fish. It is also recommended that the tube be sealed at one end. The reasoning behind the use of a narrow sealed tube as a spawning site is that a confined space is needed in order to concentrate the sperm and ensure proper fertilization of the eggs. It has also been suggested that the male bristlenose needs to trap the female inside the cave in order to convince her to release her eggs. In my experience, a narrow tube is not needed. In fact, these narrow clay tubes have been known to trap and kill fish who, given no other choice, are forced to spawn in places that are far too small. In many cases, the tubes are so small that the spawning pair are forced to take turns entering the tube because both fish can't fit inside at the same time. As you may recall, the bristlenose is covered in hard bony plates and backwards pointing teeth that are designed to help lock the fish in place. The hard bony plates make the fish very rigid, and the skin covered in tiny teeth give the fish a texture like sandpaper. The combination of these two things can spell disaster in a tiny clay tube. This is an example of the typical clay tube that many people use as a spawning cave for their bristlenose plecos. It's actually a plant watering spike, and the one seen here measures 7 inches in length and has an entrance that is 1.5 inches wide. These tubes are inexpensive and convenient to use. However, I would like to suggest a new approach that adds a whole new dimension to keeping these remarkable fish. As you can see, I have a very different approach. I use a small cave designed for reptiles, and I attach it right to the glass with aquarium-safe silicone. My fish breed frequently, and there are no problems with egg fertilization. It's also apparent that the male has no need to trap the female in his cave. With this approach, you'll be able to see exactly what's happening at every moment in the process. No more guessing if your fish have laid eggs or not. And you'll get to see behaviors that you just can't see inside a clay pipe or a flower pot. You can watch them lay the eggs, then watch the eggs develop and hatch. I highly recommend getting a powerful magnifying glass so that you can see all of the little details. This cave will also work for other cavity spawning species such as Crebensis cichlids and possibly even the Apistogrammas. The interior dimensions of the cave are as follows. Front to back, 4.5 inches. Top to bottom, 5 inches. I have my cave attached to the front of the aquarium, but you may want to attach yours on the side of the tank. The entrance is approximately 1.125 inches across by 1.5 inches from top to bottom. One of the advantages to using the plant watering spikes is that they're less expensive than the reptile cave. I bought 4 of these clay spikes for around $15, whereas the cave will cost you around $10. Another advantage to using the plant watering spikes is that it's easier to remove the fry from the cave after they hatch and place them in their own grow-out tank. Still, I find that the reptile cave approach is a much more enjoyable way to keep these fish. The cave is positioned 4 inches above the bottom of this 29-gallon aquarium. There are 2 large sponge filters hidden in back, several large pieces of driftwood, several unattached anubias plants, a heater, and 3 caves, only one of which is attached to the glass. This aquarium design provides a large amount of surface area for the newly emerging fry. The anubias leaves and multiple pieces of driftwood all provide a near constant food source for the hungry young fish as they begin to leave the cave. The male remains with the fry guarding the cave entrance until the majority of the fry have left. The fries seem reluctant to leave at first and often make short trips away from the cave entrance only to quickly race back inside at the first hint of danger. The fry seen here is just outside the cave entrance. It was born 6 days ago. Here we can see a fry clinging to its father's bristles. Watch closely as this little fry tries to leave home and then suddenly changes its mind. Eventually, all of the fry will summon the courage to leave the cave. They feed almost constantly, grazing on nearly every surface in the aquarium, so providing them with a complex environment that contains a lot of surface area is very important at this stage of their development. As you watch this young fry rasping away at this branch, notice how it moves itself along the branch using only the muscles in its mouth. The stiff body wall created by the bony plates adds structural support to the rear portion of its body. This rigid body design allows the fish to hang upside down by its mouth while still keeping the rest of its body straight. Be sure to notice how the pleco moves along this branch using only the muscles in its mouth. This gap keeps the gill covers away from the substrate. And the ventral fins, also known as pelvic fins, are used to lift the body during feeding and locomotion, so that the soft underbelly is not dragged over the bottom. Be sure to note the extent to which the bristlenose uses its ventral fins to help lift the rear portion of its body during feeding. You may want to try adding a piece of floating driftwood to your pleco tank. Under the bright lights at the surface of the aquarium, these floating logs can be a valuable source of algae for both the fry and their parents. While we don't usually think of driftwood as a living thing, the surface of aged driftwood is teeming with multiple forms of both animal and plant life. These naturally occurring food sources, known collectively as a biofilm, cover nearly every surface in the aquarium and are an important food source for the young fry in their first few weeks of life. You can keep bristlenose in a tank without wood, and they can survive, but in my opinion, they will not thrive. Broadleaf plants and driftwood not only provide multiple surfaces for the fry to graze on, but they also provide much-needed structures for the fry to attach themselves to. This aspect of their care is often neglected, but I feel that it deserves some consideration. Because just as we would be sure to leave open space for a group of angelfish to swim in, we must do the opposite for a group of plecos by providing them with multiple surfaces in the water column upon which to rest and feed. Without these structures in the water column, all of the bristlenose end up being crowded together on the bottom of the tank, shuffling around in their own droppings. The floating driftwood also serves as a feeding station. I use a push pin to attach various foods such as zucchini and spinach to the wood. One important note about this technique that is worth mentioning is that the floating driftwood will reduce the movement of water at the surface of the aquarium. This reduction in water movement could reduce the amount of dissolved oxygen in the tank. So if you're going to use this technique, I suggest adding a couple air stones to keep the water turning over. I normally have 2 air stones running in this tank, but they've been turned off for filming. The other drawback to this aquarium design is that it's difficult to remove the debris that settles at the bottom of the tank. However, the plants are not attached to the driftwood, so for a thorough cleaning I remove the Anubias plants and some of the driftwood so that I can reach the bottom. This aquarium does not have a substrate. These fish eat a lot and they poop a lot, so their tanks can get a bit messy. I can certainly see why many people keep their bristlenose catfish in a relatively bare tank. This albino fry gives us the opportunity to see the digestive tract in action. The long digestive tract of the bristlenose is typical of animals with a plant-centered diet. While they do love their vegetables, the bristlenose is best described as an opportunistic omnivore, which is just a fancy way of saying that they will take what they can get whenever they can get it. A diet that's about 90% plant matter and 10% animal matter is an appropriate balance for good health. Now let's speed up the film so that we can observe that high-fiber diet in action. The movement you are seeing is known as peristalsis, which is a wave of muscular contractions that move food from one end of the digestive tract to the other. A diet that leans too heavily on animal proteins can cause peristalsis to slow down or even stop. This can lead to intestinal troubles such as bloating and, in extreme cases, death. While there are some catfish that eat wood and require it as part of their diet, the bristlenose does not eat wood. However, it does rasp at the surface of the wood to consume the biofilm growing on it. Large quantities of biofilm increase the survival rate of newly emerged fry, and it's highly recommended that you include wood in their aquarium. The bristlenose does not seem to bother my Anubias plants, but I have heard stories of them eating Amazon sword plants, so some caution may be warranted there. Anubias are the ideal plants to use with the bristlenose because they're sturdy and their large leaves provide a lot of surface area for the young fry to graze on. Raw zucchini floats, so this piece has been parboiled to make it sink. Parboiling the zucchini also makes it softer and easier for the newly emerged fry to eat. Be sure to either use organic vegetables or wash them thoroughly before using to remove any chemical residues that may harm your fish. Peeling the zucchini is also an effective way to remove any potentially harmful chemicals. Green beans are also recommended. They're inexpensive and they freeze well. You can buy in bulk and freeze in small portions, and the bristlenose really seem to love them. Green peas that have had the skin removed are often recommended as an ideal soft food for the young fry. However, removing the skin is a bit tedious and the peas are messy, so I don't use them to feed my fry. Here they are, eating a slice of raw cucumber. Sweet potato, kale, spinach, and carrots are also appreciated by some bristlenose. Once again, the albino bristlenose gives us the opportunity to see things that are normally hidden from view. These two bubbles are the tiny paired swim bladders. Bottom-dwelling species such as the Ancistrus catfish have no need to float in the middle of the water column, so the swim bladder has been greatly reduced in size. However, the swim bladder has not been lost entirely because it also plays a vital role in the transmission and reception of sound. In fact, catfish have excellent hearing and have been said to behave strangely just prior to the arrival of an earthquake. In Japanese mythology, earthquakes are said to be caused by a giant catfish named Namazu that lives beneath the mud in Japan. Fittingly, some of the earthquake warning signs on their roadways feature the image of a catfish. High-quality algae wafers are good to have on hand, but many brands are mostly fish meal and contain very little plant material. So read the labels carefully and avoid the brands who list fish meal as their first ingredient. Algae wafers are rumored to cause intestinal trouble and bloating in some fish, so they should be used sparingly. I suspect that intestinal troubles are more common when we rely on algae wafers that contain a lot of animal proteins and very little plant material. Algae wafers are difficult for the bristlenose to eat because they keep moving, and it's much easier for them to rasp at a stationary object. Algae wafers will sometimes spin in a circle as the bristlenose eats them. The spinning is caused by the rows of teeth in the lower jaw, which are divided into two halves that can operate independently of each other. The lower jaw is much more mobile than the upper jaw. These fish are not scavengers that can thrive on leftover food and tank algae. They need to be given food that is meant specifically for them. These fry are about a month old, and they're sharing a carnivore pellet with some pink ram's horn snails. I only feed this high-protein food to my fry about once or twice a week. Clean, warm water and a steady supply of high-quality, species-appropriate foods is the best way to increase the growth rate of the fry. The males begin to get their bristles when they're about 2 to 3 inches long. This usually takes about 6 months. The length of time that it takes to grow the bristles will be determined to a large degree by water temperature, the quality and quantity of their food, as well as how clean you can keep their water. This is a young male. Females do not get bristles that are positioned this high on the snout. The bristles on a female, if she has any, are limited to this lower portion of the face. They're not as long as the males, and there are fewer of them. Unfortunately, none of my females have any bristles, so I can't show them to you. If this was a female, the bristles would be limited to this area on the rim of their snout. Bristles in this area of the snout indicate that this is a male. There is some evidence to suggest that dominant males can suppress bristle growth in subdominant males, so removing a dominant male from a group that appears to be mostly female can cause bristles to rapidly begin growing on the subdominant males. This is one of my females. Be sure to notice her 2 large nostrils and the granular texture of her skin. It has nothing to do with sexing the fish, but it's not something I wanted you to miss. Watch closely as she's about to take a few short breaths out of the left side of her mouth. As you may recall, in order to maintain proper suction, the bristlenose only breathes in using one side of its mouth at a time. Here's another female. Since she's resting on a log, there's no need to use suction to maintain her position, so she puckers her lips to make it easier for her to bring water in through her mouth. If you look closely, you can see a row of teeth hanging down. Not a single bristle on this female. The overall body shape can also be an indicator of the sex. This is a female. Notice how her body widens from the tip of her nose all the way back to her belly, before finally tapering to a point at the tail, while the male tapers continuously from the head all the way to the tail. This difference becomes even more pronounced when the female is holding eggs. While looking at a group of fry that are all the same age, the males will tend to be the larger individuals in the group. For instance, these fry are all the same age, so this larger fish in the middle is probably a young male. This is a valuable piece of information because adult pairs are not usually offered for sale, so many people will need to begin with a small group of unsexed fry and then grow them out until they can determine which ones are the males. I like to take out the larger fry that I assume to be male as soon as I spot them and give them a tank of their own. And that concludes part 2 of the video. Please be sure to join me for part 3.